I'm Tamsin Thorne, 29, and I've spent the last decade documenting the world's most dangerous secrets from behind a lens. The neon sign outside flickered with a violent buzzing sound, casting intermittent splashes of sickly pink light across my table. I sat in the corner booth of a diner that smelled of burnt grease and floor wax, nursing a coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. My camera bag was wedged between my feet and the wall, a heavy, reassuring weight against my calf. But my jacket pocket felt terrifyingly light. I had lost my phone 3 hours ago at the train station during the rush hour crush. For anyone else, it would be an annoyance. For me, given the story I was currently breaking regarding a corrupt pharmaceutical merger, it was a potential death sentence. I had encrypted everything, but panic was still clawing at the back of my throat. I stared into the black swirl of my coffee, trying to calculate my next move. I needed a burner and I needed to get off the grid. Then the air pressure in the diner dropped. It happened in an instant, my ears popping as if I were descending rapidly in an airplane. The low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed to vanish, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. I looked up, the hair on my arms standing rigid. A woman was shuffling toward me. She looked ancient, her face a topography of deep, jagged wrinkles resembling a dried apple left to rot in the sun. She wore a heavy woolen coat that was soaked through, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum floor with a steady, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. But it was her eyes that froze the breath in my lungs. They were milky white, completely devoid of irises or pupils, like hard-boiled eggs peeled of their shell. She stopped at the edge of my table. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe visibly. "You left this at the train station, dear," she wheezed. Her voice sounded like dry leaves being crushed under a boot. It scraped against my nerves, sending a violent shiver down my spine. From the deep folds of her wet sleeve, a hand emerged. It was skeletal, the skin translucent and pulled tight over knobby joints. It trembled violently, vibrating with a palsy that seemed almost unnatural. She placed my phone on the Formica tabletop. I stared at it. It was my case. My cracked screen protector in the top right corner. It was undeniably mine. But how? I had been miles away. I hadn't told a soul I was coming to this specific diner in this specific forgotten corner of the city. I started to say, but the word died on my lips. The atmosphere around us turned unnervingly cold. It wasn't just a draft from the door. It was a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to radiate from her body. I could see my own breath misting in the air between us. "Don't unlock it yet," she whispered, leaning in closer. "They are listening to the heartbeat of the machine." My stomach lurched. Who are you?" She didn't answer. She just smiled, and it was a horrifying expression, revealing gums that were gray and receded. The smell hit me then, rolling off her in a suffocating wave. It wasn't the smell of the rain or the diner grease. It was sharp and metallic. Ozone. It smelled like a lightning strike, mixed with the cloying, sweet stench of something dead and bloating in the heat. I gagged, instinctively recoiling into the vinyl booth. "Please just tell me how you found me." "Run, Tamsin," she rasped. She knew my name. I reached for the device, my fingers brushing against the glass. It felt like touching a block of dry ice. It burned with cold. I snatched it up, desperate to inspect it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Wait," I said, looking up. "What do you mean, run?" The space in front of my booth was empty. I blinked, my brain failing to process the visual information. I scrambled out of the booth, nearly tripping over my camera bag. I spun in a frantic circle. The diner was a long, narrow railcar style. There was nowhere to hide. The cook was in the back, scraping a grill with his back turned. The only other customer, a trucker, was snoring softly 3 booths down. The bell above the door hadn't jingled. The door itself was still shut tight against the rain. She had vanished into the midnight rain, leaving behind only that faint, terrifying scent of ozone and decay lingering in the air. I looked down at the phone in my hand. It vibrated once, a harsh buzz that made me jump. The screen lit up. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a missed call. It was a black screen with a single line of green text that typed itself out as I watched, my blood turning to ice. File transfer complete. I hadn't transferred anything. I hadn't even unlocked it yet. A pair of headlights swept across the diner window, blindingly bright. A black SUV slowed to a crawl outside, the engine purring with a menacing, low rumble. I saw the silhouette of a man in the passenger seat, raising something to his eye. A thermal scope. They weren't looking for the phone. They were looking for what was inside it now. And the old woman had just made me the courier. I'm Tamsin Thorne, 29, and I've spent the last decade documenting the world's most dangerous secrets from behind a lens. The black SUV outside idled with a predatory patience, its headlights cutting through the diner's gloom like searchlights. I ducked lower into the booth, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked down at the phone in my hand, desperate to understand what the hell was happening. I tried to lift it closer to my face, but my arms sagged unexpectedly. The device felt impossibly heavy. It was a dense, unnatural weight that dragged my hand down toward the table. It felt as if the lithium battery and microchips had been scooped out and replaced with solid lead. My wrist ached instantly from the strain. I hadn't pressed a single button, yet the screen suddenly flickered to life. It wasn't the familiar wake-up animation I was used to. It was a jagged, static glitch that settled into a low, pulsing glow. I needed to see what that file transfer message meant. I tried to swipe up on the glass to bypass the lock screen. My finger met resistance. A strange, viscous film coated the surface of the display. It wasn't rain and it wasn't grease from the diner table. I squinted in the dim light. The substance shimmered with a sickly, iridescent sheen, swirling like oil on a puddle of gasoline. The texture made my skin crawl, sending a wave of nausea rolling through my gut. I wiped my finger on my jeans, but the slick sensation remained, clinging to my pores. Panic overrode my common sense. I needed access, and I needed it now. I positioned my thumb over the biometric scanner at the bottom of the screen. I pressed down. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The sensor didn't glow with its usual soft white light. It flared a harsh, aggressive crimson. The color was blinding, like staring directly into a laser pointer. A searing heat shot through the pad of my thumb. It felt like I had pressed my flesh against a red-hot stove burner. The pain was absolute and white-hot. I gasped, a strangled sound that got lost in the quiet diner. I yanked my hand back, shaking it wildly to cool the burn. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I looked down at my hand, trembling uncontrollably. There was a perfect, charred circle burned into the center of my thumbprint. The skin was blackened and peeling. A wisp of gray smoke curled up from my own flesh. The sickeningly sweet smell of singed hair and cooked meat drifted up to my nose. I gagged, clutching my wrist with my other hand. On the table, the phone began to change again. It started to hum. It wasn't the buzz of a vibration motor receiving a call. It was a low, resonating frequency that I could feel in the hollows of my teeth. It sounded like a power transformer overload. The sound deepened, growing louder and more aggressive. The porcelain coffee cup on the table began to shudder. The spoon rattled against the saucer with a metallic clatter. The heavy formica table vibrated beneath my elbows. I stared at the device in horror. It lay there in the pool of neon light, heavy and menacing, guarding a secret that was physically rejecting me. The SUV door outside slammed shut. Footsteps crunched on the wet gravel. I was trapped between a hunter outside and a device that was actively hurting me inside. I slammed the heavy steel door of my apartment shut and threw the deadbolt, the metallic clack echoing like a gunshot in the small, dark room. My chest heaved, sucking in ragged gasps of stale air that smelled of old books and developing fluid. I didn't stop at the deadbolt. I fumbled with the chain, my fingers shaking so violently that I scraped my knuckles against the doorframe before finally sliding the metal knob into its track. I dragged my heavy wooden dresser across the floor, the legs screeching against the hardwood, and jammed it against the entrance. Only then did I collapse against the wood, sliding down to the floor, my legs turning to jelly. I pressed my ear against the cold steel of the door, listening. Silence. No heavy boots thudding up the stairs. No low rumble of that black SUV idling at the curb outside. Just the frantic, deafening drum beat of my own heart hammering against my ribs, threatening to crack the bone. I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable sound of a battering ram or a lockpick. But the hallway remained quiet. I had lost them. For now. I looked down at my hand. The phone was clenched in my left fist, my knuckles white. The device was still uncomfortably warm, radiating a feverish heat that seeped into my palm. My right thumb throbbed with a vicious, stinging pulse where the biometric sensor had branded me. I held it up to the sliver of moonlight cutting through my blinds. The burn was an ugly, blistered circle, a physical reminder that this machine was no longer mine. It had been weaponized. I couldn't stay on the floor. I scrambled up, my knees knocking together, and rushed to my work desk. I swept a stack of unpaid bills and lens filters onto the floor with a crash, clearing a space. I placed the phone in the center of the desk under the harsh glare of my architectural lamp. It sat there, innocent and black, looking like any other piece of consumer tech, but I knew better. It felt heavy with malice. "Okay," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Let's see what you're hiding." I grabbed my precision repair kit from the shelf, a small, velvet-lined box usually reserved for fixing jammed shutter leaves on my vintage Leicas. I unzipped it, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet room. I selected a pentalobe screwdriver, the tip finer than a needle. I reached for the phone but hesitated. The memory of the shock was still fresh. I pulled the sleeve of my sweater down over my hand, using the wool as a makeshift glove, and flipped the device over. I brought the screwdriver to the tiny screws flanking the charging port. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't seat the driver. I took a deep breath, holding it, forcing my muscles to lock up. Focus, Tamsin, I exhaled slowly and guided the tip into the screw head. It caught. I turned. The screw didn't just loosen, it hissed. A tiny puff of pressurized gas escaped the casing, smelling faintly of sulfur and that same sharp ozone scent the old woman had carried. I recoiled, coughing, but forced myself to continue. I removed the second screw. I picked up a plastic spudger tool and wedged it into the seam between the screen and the aluminum body. I leveraged it down. The adhesive fought me, sticky and resilient, feeling more like organic sinew than industrial glue. I gritted my teeth and pushed harder. With a sickening crack, the seal gave way. I lifted the display assembly. The internals looked wrong. The battery was there, a black rectangle, but it was pulsing. I blinked, leaning closer. It wasn't a trick of the light. The battery casing was expanding and contracting rhythmically like a lung breathing shallow breaths. "What the hell are you?" I murmured. I used a pair of anti-static tweezers to pry up the battery connector. The pulsing stopped instantly. The phone died, the heat dissipating rapidly into the cold desk surface. I lifted the battery out. There, tucked into a recess that shouldn't have existed, was something that made no sense. It wasn't a SIM card, it wasn't a microchip, it was a shard of glass. It was roughly the size of a postage stamp, jagged and uneven, as if it had been broken off a larger structure. The material was obsidian black, swallowing the light from my desk lamp rather than reflecting it. I brought the tweezers down and clamped onto it. It was heavy, impossibly dense for its size. I lifted it out of the phone chassis. As I held it up, the light from my desk lamp hit the surface at an angle. The black glass suddenly flared. I gasped and nearly dropped it. Microscopic lines etched into the surface, invisible to the naked eye a moment ago, began to catch the light. They weren't just silver scratches, they were circuitry. Intricate fractal patterns that looked less like engineering and more like a nervous system woven from starlight. The air in my apartment shifted. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a second. The shard began to vibrate in the tweezers, emitting a high-pitched whine that drilled into my molars. I tried to drop it, but I couldn't. The vibration wasn't just physical, it was magnetic. It was pulling at the iron in my blood. "Stop!" I cried out, grabbing my wrist with my other hand. The silver lines on the glass ignited with a blinding luminescence. A beam of coherent blue light shot out from the shard, hitting the dust motes dancing in the air of my apartment. The light didn't hit the wall. It stopped in the center of the room, expanding, fracturing, and reassembling itself. I scrambled back, knocking my chair over, pressing my back against the wall. A hologram hovered in the middle of my studio. It wasn't the grainy, flickering blue ghosts you see in sci-fi movies. This was crisp, terrifyingly real, resolving with 8K clarity. It was a 3D topographic map. I recognized the layout immediately. The winding gray ribbon of the highway, the dense grid of the downtown district, and to the north, the massive, dark expanse of the Kielder Reservoir. But the map didn't stop at the surface. The projection shifted, peeling back the layers of earth and water like skin being flayed from muscle. Beneath the blue shimmer of the reservoir water, buried 500 feet into the bedrock, was a facility. It was massive. A sprawling, brutalist hive of tunnels and containment cells arranged in a concentric circle. Red lights pulsed in the holographic projection, marking patrol routes and thermal signatures. I watched tiny dots of light moving through the corridors, people. Guards. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the holographic structure until they locked onto a set of numbers floating in the air above the central chamber. Coordinates: 55.234, 2.489 status. Active containment subject. Origin: the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The pharmaceutical merger I had been investigating, the corruption, the payoffs, it was all a smokescreen. A distraction. They weren't building a new research wing. They were hiding something that was already there. Something they kept under millions of gallons of water. I stared at the glowing map, the blue light reflecting in my wide eyes. The old woman hadn't just given me a phone, she had given me the keys to a dungeon. And then the hologram turned red. A new text box scrolled across the projection, large and foreboding. Unauthorized access detected, trace complete, unit dispatched. The shard in my tweezers went dead, turning back into a piece of dull black glass. The hologram vanished, plunging the room back into darkness. From the hallway outside, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots stopping directly in front of my door. I'm Beatrix Vance, 29 years old, and until tonight, my biggest problem was finding a gallery willing to exhibit my monochromatic studies of abandoned industrial architecture. Now I am standing in the center of my darkroom turned living space, staring at a dead piece of alien glass while a death squad assembles on the other side of my door. The silence that followed the hologram's warning wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air in a tunnel right before a train screams through. I held my breath, my lungs burning, waiting for the doorknob to turn. I expected shouting. I expected the wood to splinter immediately under the force of a battering ram. Instead, a heavy, wet thud echoed from the hallway. It sounded like a sack of wet cement being dropped from a great height, vibrating through the floorboards and up into the soles of my feet. I flinched, knocking my hip against the desk, sending the tweezers clattering to the floor. Before I could process the noise, another sound ripped through the building, the terrifying, high-pitched crash of glass shattering on the floor below. The front entrance to the apartment complex. My heart hammered against my ribs with such violence I thought it might bruise the bone. They weren't just outside my door, they were swarming the building. They were sealing off the exits. Move, Beatrix, I whispered to myself, but my feet felt leaden, rooted to the warped hardwood. I needed to see. I needed to know what was waiting for me. I forced my legs to move, creeping toward the door I had barricaded with my dresser. The heavy furniture groaned slightly as I leaned over it, pressing my eye to the brass peephole. I expected to see the distorted, fish-eye view of armed men in tactical gear. I expected the harsh glare of the hallway's fluorescent strip lights. I saw nothing. It was absolute, suffocating darkness. They had cut the hallway lights. The blackness was so complete it felt like looking into the void of space. I pulled back, blinking, and pressed my eye to the glass again. A shadow moved within the shadow, a shift in the density of the blackness, smoother than the air around it. Then the voice came. It didn't come from a throat. It vibrated through the wood of the door, transmitting directly into the dresser I was leaning against, conducting through my bones. Beatrix. I scrambled back, stumbling over my own feet, falling hard onto my tailbone. The name hung in the air, not spoken, but emitted. It was a cold, synthesized sound, stripped of all breath and cadence. It sounded like a jagged audio file played at half speed, metallic and wrong. We know the device is compromised, the voice buzzed, the sound seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Unlock the door. The biological integration is already critical. Biological integration. The word sent a spike of ice water down my spine. I looked at the phone on the desk. It was dead. The obsidian shard was dull and lifeless. If the phone was dead, how were they tracking me with such precision? How did they know I was standing right at the door? A sudden, searing heat flared in my right hand. I gasped, clutching my wrist. It wasn't the dull throb of a burn anymore. It was a piercing, electric agony, as if someone had driven a hot needle into the meat of my thumb. I looked down at my hand. The room was dark, lit only by the faint, sickly yellow glow of the street lamps filtering through the blinds, but my hand was illuminated by its own light. The charred circle where the biometric sensor had rejected me was no longer a simple blister. It was glowing. A ring of eerie violet light pulsed beneath my skin, illuminating the veins in my wrist with a ghostly translucence. The light wasn't steady. It beat in time with the frantic rhythm of my heart. I stared in horror as the violet hue deepened, turning the color of a fresh bruise, then brightening to the intensity of a UV lamp. The skin around the mark was tightening, pulling, turning gray and ash-like. It looked exactly like the material of the obsidian chip I had pulled from the phone. I wasn't just holding a stolen secret, I was becoming part of it. Oh God, I choked out, trying to rub the mark off with my other hand, digging my nails into the burning skin. It didn't stop. The friction only made it pulse brighter, sending waves of nausea rolling through my stomach. The rejection is fatal without stabilization. The synthesized voice droned from the hallway, closer now, right up against the wood. Open the door, Beatrix. Let us excise the anomaly. Excise, cut it out. They weren't here to arrest me. They were here to amputate. I scrambled backward, crab walking across the floor until my back hit the cold radiator. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots through the panic. The old woman, she had worn gloves, thick leather gloves, even though it was mid-July. She hadn't handed me the phone, she had dropped it. She knew what the Touch ID would do. She had used me as a carrier pigeon, but she had branded me as a target. The doorknob slowly began to turn. The lock was engaged, the deadbolt was thrown, and the dresser was in the way, but the handle turned with a mechanical, grinding persistence that suggested it didn't care about resistance. Click. The lock picked itself. I heard the tumblers fall one by one, manipulated by something electronic on the other side. The deadbolt slid back with a smooth, oiled slide. The door pushed inward. It hit the back of the dresser with a heavy thud. The dresser held, for now. The phone, I whispered, my eyes darting back to the desk. I couldn't leave it. The map, the facility under the water, the coordinates. If I left it, I was just a woman with a glowing thumb and a death sentence. With the phone, I had leverage. Or at least I had the proof. I lunged for the desk, scooping up the disassembled parts, the chassis, the battery, the screws, and the terrifying shard of black glass. I shoved them into my pockets, ignoring the heat radiating from the shard. The door shoved against the dresser again. Thud, the wood of the dresser cracked. A sliver of light from the hallway, no, not hallway light, but a tactical red laser sliced through the gap. I looked at my glowing thumb. It was a beacon in the dark. I grabbed a roll of black gaffer tape from my equipment bag. With shaking teeth, I ripped a strip off and wound it tightly around my thumb, layer after layer, until the violet glow was smothered, stifled down to a faint, bloody pulse beneath the fabric. I ran to the window. We were on the 3rd floor. The fire escape was rusted, clinging to the brickwork by sheer habit and layers of old paint. Behind me, the dresser groaned, tipping forward. A gloved hand, holding something that looked like a surgical saw, reached through the widening gap in the door. I threw the window sash up and climbed out into the rain. I'm Beatrix Vance, 29 years old, and 5 minutes ago I was a struggling photographer worrying about rent. Now I am a fugitive carrying a piece of alien technology in my pocket and a biological curse in my veins. I scrambled onto the fire escape, the freezing iron biting into my palms as I descended into the darkness. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the rusted metal grate beneath my boots into a slick trap. Every step was a gamble. My foot slipped on the 3rd rung and I slammed my shin against the sharp edge of the stairs. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. The metallic clang of my boot hitting the railing echoed through the alleyway like a gunshot. I froze, pressing my body flat against the wet brick of the building, praying the sound had been swallowed by the storm. My right hand throbbed with a violence that made my vision blur. Even through the layers of black gaffer tape, I could feel the violet light pulsing. It felt hot and foreign, like a parasite burrowing deeper into my marrow. I looked down through the metal mesh of the landing. The alleyway below should have been empty. It was a dead-end service lane used only by garbage trucks and rats. Instead, the wet pavement reflected the sleek, ominous curves of 3 black SUVs. They blocked both ends of the alley, boxing me in completely. Their headlights were off, but their engines were idling in a low, predatory growl that vibrated in the hollow of my chest. I watched paralyzed as the doors of the vehicles slid open in unison. Men in tactical gear emerged. They didn't move like police officers. They didn't shout commands or wave badges. Their movements were silent and synchronized, fluid and terrifying, like a pack of wolves on a hunt. They wore matte black armor that seemed to absorb the ambient light of the city. Their faces were obscured by ballistic masks that reflected the rain. They held rifles with compact suppressors, scanning the upper windows with practiced efficiency. A realization hit me sharper and colder than the wind biting through my soaked shirt. The phone wasn't lost. The old woman hadn't dropped it by accident. It was stolen. It had been modified. It was a lure, and I was the catch. They didn't just need someone to find the phone. They needed a biological host. The map I saw, the facility under the water, it was encrypted with something that required a living, breathing interface to unlock. The shard hadn't just burned me, it had rewritten me. I wasn't just holding the key anymore. I was the key. I was a walking decryption algorithm for a vault I didn't even know existed. A beam of white light sliced through the rain, sweeping across the brick facade just 10 feet above my head. They were scanning the fire escapes. Panic flared in my gut, hot and acidic. If I stayed here, I was dead. If I tried to climb back up, I was dead. The only way was down, but the ground was swarming with a death squad designed to erase people like me. I looked over the railing again. Directly below the second-floor landing, nestled against the wall in the deepest shadow of the alley, was a large industrial dumpster. One of the plastic lids was flipped open, exposing a gaping maw of darkness. It was a 20-foot drop, maybe 15 if I hung from the railing. The tactical light swept lower, inching toward my boots. I didn't let myself think. Thinking was what got me into this. Thinking was what made me pick up the phone in the first place. I swung my legs over the railing. I gripped the cold, wet iron with my good hand and my taped-up, throbbing claw. I lowered myself until my arms were fully extended, my muscles screaming in protest. I took a breath that tasted of ozone and fear. I let go. The freefall lasted a heartbeat, a terrifying void where gravity claimed me. I crashed into the dumpster. I didn't hit hard metal, I hit something soft, wet, and yielding. The impact knocked the wind out of me with a brutal whoosh. I tumbled forward, sinking into mounds of sodden cardboard and trash bags bursting with refuse. The stench hit me instantly. It was a thick, physical wall of rotting food, stale beer, and decay. It filled my nose and coated my throat, making me gag violently. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to retch, tears streaming from my eyes. Something heavy and metallic clattered on the pavement outside. "Perimeter secure," a voice said. It wasn't the synthesized voice from my door. This was human, but it was cold, professional, detached. "Target is not in the apartment. Heat signature residue suggests she exited via the north window." "Sweep the alley," another voice commanded. "The biomarker is active. She can't hide from the scanner." The scanner. My heart stopped. The phone, the chip, my thumb, they could track the biological signal. I frantically shoved myself deeper into the trash. I burrowed under bags of heavy, wet refuse, pulling greasy cardboard over my head. I curled into a tight ball, cradling my throbbing hand against my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut as if darkness could save me from technology. I heard boots splashing in the puddles outside. Step by step. Closer, a harsh blue light swept over the opening of the dumpster. It illuminated the trash bag inches from my face. I saw the condensation on the black plastic. I saw a maggot crawling slowly across a discarded pizza box next to my ear. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Signal is erratic, a voice said right outside the metal wall of the dumpster. Interference from the storm, or maybe the integration is unstable. Check the bins, the command came. My hand burned. The violet light beneath the tape seemed to pulse hotter, angry at being hidden. I squeezed my wrist, trying to cut off the circulation, trying to kill the signal with my own grip. A gloved hand grabbed the rim of the dumpster. The plastic shook. I stared at the sliver of light leaking through the trash covering me. I waited for the barrel of a gun. I waited for the end. Then a loud, piercing siren wailed from the street corner. A police cruiser, unrelated, speeding past the alley entrance with lights flashing. The hand on the rim hesitated. "Eyes up," the leader barked. "Local law enforcement, we are Ghost. Pull back to the perimeter. Let the drone take the search." The hand released the dumpster. I heard the heavy rustle of gear as they moved away, retreating into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. The engines of the SUVs revved, not with a roar, but with a high-pitched whine of electric acceleration. I lay buried in the garbage, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I just lay there in the dark, smelling the rot, clutching a hand that was no longer entirely mine, listening to the rain wash away the footprints of the monsters who were hunting me. I waited until the silence in the alley was heavy enough to crush me before I dared to move. My muscles had seized up in the cold, locking my limbs into a terrified rigor, and uncurling from my fetal position felt like breaking my own bones. I pushed the heavy, wet garbage bags aside, the stench of sour milk and decay clinging to my skin like a second oily layer. I climbed out of the dumpster, my boots skidding on the slick metal rim, and collapsed onto the wet pavement. I didn't have time to vomit. I didn't have time to wipe the grime from my face. The drone was coming. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted. I stuck to the shadows, weaving through the labyrinth of back streets that snaked behind the city's main avenues. The rain was my only ally, a relentless gray curtain that blurred the world and hopefully scrambled whatever thermal optics were scanning for me from the sky. My lungs burned with a chemical fire. Every breath was a jagged intake of freezing mist and exhaust fumes. I could feel the bruise on my shin throbbing in time with my heartbeat, a dull, rhythmic hammer against the bone, but the pain in my right hand eclipsed everything. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was a vibration, a low-frequency hum that seemed to originate in the marrow of my thumb and echo up my arm, rattling my teeth. I turned a corner, my shoulder slamming into a brick wall as I overshot the turn on the slick sidewalk. I stumbled, catching myself on a rusted drain pipe. I looked up. Above the skyline, a faint, buzzing whine drifted down through the storm. The drone. I needed cover, real cover. Not just darkness, but a place with heat signatures, noise, and electrical interference. Across the street, the flickering neon sign of 24/7 wash and fold buzzed with a dying, erratic light. Through the condensation-fogged windows, I could see rows of machines tumbling, but the place looked empty of people. It was a risk, but staying in the open was a death sentence. I pulled my hood low over my face, hiding the grime and the terror in my eyes, and pushed through the glass door. The air inside was thick and humid, smelling of cheap detergent and fabric softener. It hit me like a physical wall, instantly fogging up my cold skin. The sound was deafening, a chaotic symphony of clanking zippers, sloshing water, and the heavy, rhythmic thrum of industrial dryers. It was perfect. The massive electrical output of the machines would mask my heat signature, and the noise would hide my ragged, panicked breathing. I moved to the back of the room, ducking behind a row of oversized dryers. I slid down against the vibrating metal panel of a machine tumbling someone's bedsheets. The heat radiating from it soaked into my freezing, wet back, but it didn't stop the shivering. I looked at my hand. The black gaffer tape was soaked through, peeling at the edges. Beneath the adhesive, the violet light was no longer a steady glow. It was pulsing violently, syncing with the frantic rhythm of my heart. I could see the veins in my wrist standing out, dark and swollen, as if something thick and black was moving through my bloodstream, fighting the current. My camera bag was still slung across my chest, miraculously unzipped but with the contents intact. I dug past my lenses, past the spare batteries, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped everything. I found the burner phone zipped into the secret lining of the bag. I kept it for Craigslist sales and sketchy photography gigs in bad neighborhoods, a relic of a life that felt like it belonged to a different person, a Beatrix Vance who worried about paying the electric bill, not about alien hit squads. I powered it on. The screen cracked to life with a blinding white light. I didn't expect a signal. I definitely didn't expect a notification. But there it was. A single text message from an unknown number. It had arrived 2 minutes ago. Don't let them touch your thumb. I stared at the pixels, my breath hitching in my throat. I hadn't used this number in 6 months. Nobody knew I had this phone. Nobody except the person who gave me the bag it was hidden in, my ex, who left the city 3 years ago. But he didn't know about the thumb. He didn't know about the shard. The phone buzzed again in my hand, nearly making me scream. Another message appeared, scrolling below the first. The upload wasn't finished. If they catch you before the sequence locks, they will amputate the digit to retrieve the key. If the sequence locks, they will take the whole host. The room spun. The hum of the dryers warped into a roar. I looked down at my hand again. I peeled back the edge of the wet tape. The skin around the puncture wound wasn't just glowing, it was changing. The veins weren't black, they were silver. An intricate geometric lattice was spreading under my epidermis, branching out from the wound like the roots of a metallic tree. It was moving up past my knuckle, creeping toward my wrist. A wave of nausea crashed over me, so potent I had to bite my own lip to keep from retching on the linoleum floor. The secret wasn't on the phone I had stolen. The shard of black glass wasn't a storage device, it was a syringe, it was a delivery system. The weapon the old woman had been protecting, the thing that could level the city, wasn't a bomb or a code stored on a hard drive. It was a biological agent, a living algorithm. And when I touched that shard, when it sliced my thumb, it didn't just cut me, it injected me. I wasn't carrying the stolen data, I was the data. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. That's why the tactical team had scanners. That's why they talked about a biomarker. I was a walking, breathing encryption key. If they caught me now while the integration was unstable, they would just cut off my thumb to get their weapon back. But if I waited, if this silver poison reached my heart or my brain, I would become the weapon itself. The sequence locks, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. I was the only living key to something that could destroy millions, and I was currently hiding behind a dryer in a laundromat, covered in garbage juice, watching my own humanity get overwritten by a violet light. A shadow fell across the front window of the laundromat. I froze. Through the gaps between the washing machines, I saw a black SUV roll slowly past the storefront. It didn't stop. It was prowling, hunting. I looked at the burner phone again. My thumbs hovered over the keypad. I needed help. I needed to know what was happening to my body before I turned into something that wasn't Beatrix Vance anymore. "Who are you?" I typed back, my fingers slipping on the wet screen. The reply was instantaneous. "Look at the reflection in the dryer door opposite you." I slowly turned my head. The chrome rim of the dryer directly across the aisle acted like a fisheye mirror. It reflected the rows of machines, the flickering fluorescent lights, and the back entrance of the laundromat. Standing in the rear doorway, dripping wet, wearing a heavy wool coat that looked 3 sizes too big, was the old woman. She wasn't dead. She wasn't captured. She was standing 20 feet away from me, her eyes locked onto mine in the reflection. She raised a finger to her lips, signaling silence, and then pointed to the service exit door behind her. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She was the one who started this. She was the one who dropped the phone. She was the reason I was being hunted. But as I looked at her in the warped reflection, I saw something else. Her right hand was tucked deep into her coat pocket, but her left hand was gripping the door frame. Her left thumb was missing. I'm Beatrix Vance, 29 years old, and until 48 hours ago, the most dangerous thing I'd ever held was a camera lens without a UV filter. The reflection of the old woman in the dryer door vanished as the rear service exit clicked shut, leaving me alone in the humid roar of the laundromat. Before I could even process the missing digit on her hand or the warning in her eyes, a sharp, cheerful sound cut through the drone of the machines. The bells above the front entrance chimed. I froze behind the row of industrial washing machines, my pulse thundering in my ears so loudly I thought it would drown out the spin cycles. I pressed my back against the vibrating metal of a dryer, my knees drawn up to my chest, making myself as small as possible. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned stale and hot, but I didn't dare exhale. Through the narrow gap between the machines, I watched him enter. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. There were no night vision goggles or Kevlar vests. He was dressed in a gray jumpsuit with a generic Metro maintenance patch on the breast pocket. He looked like the kind of guy who fixed leaky pipes or restocked vending machines, the kind of guy who was invisible to the rest of the world. But the way he moved was wrong. He didn't walk, he glided. His steps were fluid, his weight shifting with a predatory grace that made the hair on my arms stand up. He didn't look at the tumbling clothes. He didn't look at the change machine. He looked at the floor. My stomach dropped as I realized my mistake. The rain, the dumpster sludge, the grime of the alley. I had tracked a path of dark, wet smears across the pristine white linoleum, a jagged arrow pointing directly to the back of the room where I was cowering. He turned his head slowly, following the trail. His face was blank, devoid of anger or urgency, which made it infinitely more terrifying. He reached into his deep pocket, and I saw the glint of something metallic, not a gun, but a slender, retractable baton. He began to walk toward my aisle. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I looked around frantically for a way out. The service door the old woman had used was 20 feet of open space away. If I ran, he'd catch me before I touched the handle. I was cornered. My right hand, the one with the glowing violet veins, gave a violent throb as if the infection was sensing the danger. The silver lattice under my skin pulsed, sending a jolt of nausea through my gut. Don't let them touch your thumb. The text message burned in my mind. If this man caught me, he wouldn't arrest me. He would carve me up right here on the linoleum. I needed a weapon. My eyes darted to the shelf behind me. Detergent pods, fabric softener sheets. Useless. Then on the bottom rack I saw it. A gallon jug of industrial-strength bleach. It was heavy plastic, thick and squared off at the edges. I reached for it with my good hand. The handle was slick with condensation. I gripped it tight, my fingers cramping with the effort to keep it from sliding out of my grasp. It weighed at least 8 pounds, a dense, liquid brick. The footsteps stopped. He was at the end of the row. I could hear him breathing now, a slow, controlled intake of air. He was listening. waiting for the rustle of a jacket or the scuff of a boot to confirm my position. I tightened my grip on the bleach jug. I shifted my weight onto the balls of my feet. I couldn't wait for him to find me. If I waited, I was dead. I had to be the one to move. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2. He took a step forward, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the floor in front of me. 3. I lunged. I exploded from behind the dryer, swinging the heavy jug with every ounce of hysterical strength I possessed. It wasn't a graceful strike. It was a desperate feral haymaker fueled by pure terror. The man reacted instantly, his head snapping toward me, the baton raising in a blur of motion. But he was expecting a runner, not a fighter. He was expecting me to be fleeing toward the door, not launching myself directly into his personal space. The corner of the heavy plastic jug connected with his temple with a sickening, wet thud. The sound was awful, like dropping a melon on concrete. The cap of the jug shattered on impact, spraying a jet of acrid bleach across his face and shoulder. He didn't scream. He didn't even grunt. His eyes just rolled back into his head and his knees buckled instantly. He collapsed to the floor, the baton clattering from his hand and sliding under a washing machine. I stood over him, my chest heaving, the broken jug dripping bleach onto my boots. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, so hard it hurt physically. I waited for him to move, to spring up and grab my throat, but he remained still, a dark puddle of blood beginning to seep from his hairline to mix with the clear, stinging puddle of bleach. I dropped the jug. It hit the floor with a hollow bounce. I should have run. The exit was right there. I should have sprinted out the back door and never looked back. But something pulled me toward him. A morbid curiosity. A need to know what this was. I knelt beside him, ignoring the chemical burn of the bleach fumes in my nose. I reached out with a trembling hand to check his pulse, but my eyes caught on his wrist. His sleeve had ridden up when he fell. On the inside of his right wrist, just above the radial artery, was a tattoo. It wasn't a picture or a word. It was a series of geometric lines, silver ink embedded deep into the skin, shimmering faintly under the fluorescent lights. I gasped, recoiling as if I'd touched a hot stove. I looked at my own hand, at the infection spreading from my thumb. The pattern on his wrist was identical to the lattice growing under my skin. The lines, the angles, the way they intersected, it was a map. And he had it marked on him like a brand. A sudden, piercing noise made me jump. It wasn't the bells this time. It was the man's pocket. His phone was ringing. I stared at the pocket of his gray jumpsuit. The vibration buzzed against the linoleum. I knew I shouldn't touch it. I knew it was a mistake. But my hand moved on its own, driven by the same terrified adrenaline that had made me swing the bleach. I reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black device. It didn't look like a normal smartphone. It was too thin, made of a material that felt like cool glass. The screen was lit up with a caller ID. No number, just a single word displayed in bold red text. Extraction. My blood ran cold. Before I could react, the screen changed. It wasn't a call anymore. The device in my hand pinged and a map appeared on the display. A blue dot pulsed at my current location. And then a second later, 3 red dots appeared on the edges of the map. They were moving fast, converging on the laundromat from 3 different directions. They weren't just hunting me. They were hurting me. I looked down at the unconscious man. He wasn't the threat. He was the scout. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping in the bleach. I grabbed my camera bag, slinging it over my shoulder, the weight of it slamming against my hip. I looked at the service door the old woman had used. It was my only chance. As I reached for the handle, I looked back at the man one last time. The silver tattoo on his wrist seemed to catch the light, pulsing faintly. It wasn't ink. I realized it with a jolt of horror that nearly buckled my knees. The lines on his wrist weren't drawn on. They were under the skin, just like mine. He wasn't just working for them. He was part of them, and whatever was inside him, whatever was currently rewriting my own DNA, was calling out to the others. I slammed through the service door and into the alley, the rain hitting my face like ice. I didn't know where the old woman had gone. I didn't know where to run. I just knew that the red dots on the screen were getting closer, and the silver fire in my veins was burning hotter with every beat of my heart. I'm Tamsin Vane, 29, and until 3 days ago, I was a senior data analyst for a private intelligence firm that specializes in burying secrets for the world's elite. I tore out of the alleyway in the stolen maintenance van, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt as I merged violently into the flow of evening traffic. The vehicle smelled of stale coffee and that acrid chemical bleach scent that was still burning the inside of my nose. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I expected to see the black SUVs, the red dots, the extraction team that wanted to peel the skin off my bones to get to the map underneath. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon blood. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from the laundromat, away from the man with the silver veins, and away from the terrifying reality that I was transforming into something inhuman. My right arm was heavy, a dead weight resting in my lap. The throbbing pain in my thumb had evolved into something worse, a cold, hollow numbness that was slowly creeping up my forearm toward my elbow. I glanced down. The sleeve of my jacket was pulled up, and in the flashing lights of passing cars, I saw the lattice. The violet and silver geometric lines were no longer just on my thumb. They had crawled past my wrist, weaving themselves under my skin like glowing ivy. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the shadows I used to work in. I reached for my personal phone with my good hand, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I knew tracking was a risk, but I was out of options. The only person who could possibly make sense of this was Arthur. Arthur had been my mentor at the agency. He was the one who taught me that data wasn't just numbers, it was a narrative. He was the one who warned me that curiosity killed more analysts than heart disease. He was the closest thing to a father I had left. I hit speed dial. The line rang once, twice. Tamsin? His voice wasn't the calm baritone anchor I was used to. It was thin, reedy. Arthur, listen to me, I gasped, swerving around a slow-moving truck. I'm in trouble, serious trouble. I was at a laundromat on 4th, and a man, he had a tattoo, Arthur, a silver tattoo inside his skin, just like the one growing on me. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the silence of a bad connection. It was the silence of a man who had stopped breathing. Where are you right now? He asked. The tremor in his voice was undeniable now. I'm heading west, I said, my eyes darting to the side mirrors. Toward the industrial district. Arthur, my arm. It's changing. And the old woman who gave me the phone, Tamsin, stop, he cut me off. His voice cracked, a sound of pure desperation. You need to listen to me very carefully. You were never supposed to find that phone. My foot eased off the gas pedal. The sentence hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. What do you mean? I whispered. I lost my phone. She just returned it. It wasn't your phone, she returned, Tamsin, Arthur said, his words tumbling out fast as if he was running out of time. The device she gave you. It's a key. And the woman, she isn't just an old woman, that was Magda Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. Magda Thorne was a ghost story at the agency. a legendary operative from the Cold War era who had supposedly died in a fire in Berlin 20 years ago. She was the boogeyman they used to scare junior recruits. She went rogue to protect the data, Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. She chose you, Tamsin. She passed the burden to you because she knew you could decode it, but she didn't realize they were already watching you. Who is watching me, Arthur? I screamed, slamming my hand against the steering wheel. Who is hunting me? The architects, he said. The people we really work for. They want the DNA sequence back. That's what is in your arm. It's not an infection, Tamsin. It's a biological hard drive. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at the glowing silver lines on my arm with fresh horror. I wasn't sick, I was storage. I can help you, Arthur said, his voice gaining a sudden, frantic strength. But you have to trust me. I have a secure team near the old textile mills on the edge of the city. If you can get there, we can extract the sequence before it overwrites your nervous system. Overwrites? I choked out. Please, Tamsin. Just drive to the mills. Pull over at the north gate. I'm the only one who can save you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man who had bought me coffee on my first day, who had toasted to my promotion, was my savior. I turned the wheel, guiding the rattling van off the highway and onto the cracked pavement of the industrial access road. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by the skeletal silhouettes of abandoned factories. The rain fell harder, drumming a manic rhythm on the roof. I'm almost there, I said, my voice trembling. I see the north gate. Good, Arthur said. Good girl, just stop the car, turn off the engine, step out with your hands visible. My team is waiting. I slowed the van to a crawl. The gate was a rusted monstrosity of chain link and barbed wire. Beyond it, the darkness was absolute. I put my foot on the brake. The van groaned to a halt. I'm stopped, I said. Okay, Arthur whispered. It's going to be okay. I reached for the door handle. But then a flash of lightning illuminated the world for a split second. I froze. In the side mirror reflected from the roof of the derelict mill building 200 yards away, I saw it. It wasn't the lightning. It was a steady, unblinking glint of glass. A lens. I knew that glint. I had seen it in training videos. It was the reflection of a high-powered scope, positioned perfectly to cover the driver's side door of a vehicle parked at the gate. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain seized my spine. Arthur, I said, my voice barely audible. Why is there a sniper on the roof? The silence on the other end was instant and absolute. Then Arthur spoke, but the fear was gone from his voice. It was replaced by a cold, dead resignation. I'm sorry, Tamsin, they have my daughter. He hung up. I didn't think. I didn't scream. My survival instinct, sharper and faster than my conscious mind, took over. I slammed the van into reverse and floored it. A split second later, the driver's side window exploded inward. The bullet missed my head by inches, burying itself in the passenger headrest with a violent thwack. Glass shards sprayed across my face, cutting my cheek. I screamed, twisting the wheel hard to the left, spinning the van around on the slick pavement. Another shot rang out, sparking off the metal hood. Arthur had sold me out. The man I trusted with my life had just tried to end it. I stomped on the accelerator, the van fishtailing wildly as I roared back toward the highway. My heart was hammering so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging against the cuts on my face. I was alone. The agency was hunting me. My mentor had betrayed me. And the silver fire in my veins was pulsing in time with my heartbeat, stronger than ever, as if it knew the danger I was in. I wiped the blood from my cheek with my glowing hand. Okay, I whispered to the empty van, my voice sounding like a stranger's. If you want a war, I'll give you one. I'm Tamsin Vane, 29, and until 3 days ago, I was a senior data analyst for a private intelligence firm that specializes in burying secrets for the world's elite. Now I am a biological anomaly bleeding out on a dirt road, driving a dead woman's legacy into the heart of nowhere. The stolen maintenance van finally gave up the ghost 3 miles past the turnoff. The engine sputtered, choked on the bad fuel, and died, leaving me in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. I didn't try to restart it. I knew it was done, just like I knew I couldn't stop moving. I pushed the heavy door open and fell more than stepped onto the muddy track. The rain had softened to a cold, relentless drizzle that soaked through my jacket instantly, but I could barely feel the cold. My body was burning from the inside out. I looked down at my arm. The sleeve of my jacket was shredded from the glass explosion during the ambush, revealing the skin beneath. It wasn't just my thumb anymore. The violet lattice had surged past my elbow, twisting around my bicep like a glowing, constricting snake. The light it cast was jagged and electric, pulsing in a rhythm that was slightly faster than my own heartbeat. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. My vision swam. The trees lining the road seemed to vibrate, their edges fuzzy and indistinct. But it wasn't just blurriness. I blinked, trying to clear my eyes, and for a second I saw it, faint white lines connecting the branches, a geometric web overlaying the natural world like a schematic. I stumbled forward, my boots sliding in the mud. The GPS on the phone, Magda's phone, had led me here. It was the only waypoint stored in the device's secure folder, labeled simply as 0. I walked for what felt like hours, though the glowing numbers on my watch said it was only 20 minutes. The path wound deeper into the forest, away from the prying eyes of satellites and snipers. Every step sent a jolt of agony up my spine. My head throbbed with a pressure that felt like my skull was too small for my brain. Then the trees broke. A small clearing opened up ahead, dominated by a rough-hewn timber cabin that looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. There were no lights on inside. The windows were dark, staring out like hollow eyes. I stopped, bracing myself against a birch tree, gasping for air. The metallic taste of blood was thick in my mouth. "I knew you'd make it," a voice rasped from the shadows. I jerked my head up. Sitting on the porch in a rocking chair that wasn't moving was the old woman. She was wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, a double-barreled shotgun resting casually across her lap. "Magda," I whispered. She didn't stand up, she didn't smile. She just watched me with eyes that were too sharp, too young for her wrinkled face. I limped toward the porch steps, my good hand raised in surrender, though I knew it was pointless. If she wanted me dead, I'd be dead. "Arthur sold me out," I said, my voice cracking. "He tried to kill me." "Arthur is a pragmatist," Magda said, her voice sounding like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "He loves his daughter more than he loves the truth. You can't blame a man for that, but you don't have to forgive him either." I reached the bottom step and collapsed, my legs finally refusing to hold me up. I sat in the mud, clutching my glowing arm to my chest. The pain was blinding now, a searing heat that made me want to scream. "What did you do to me?" I managed to choke out. "What is this thing inside me?" Magda leaned forward into the faint violet light cast by my own skin. For the first time I saw her face clearly. The breath trapped in my throat. I was looking at myself. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a distortion of time. The curve of the jaw, the shape of the nose, the specific arch of the eyebrows. It was my face, aged 40 years and weathered by a lifetime of running. It's not a thing, Tamsin, she said softly. It's an inheritance. She pulled her hand out from under the blanket and rolled up her sleeve. Her arm was a ruin of scar tissue and blackened veins, but beneath the damage I saw the faint, dying remnants of the same violet lattice. Hers was dim, flickering like a bulb about to burn out. The sequence isn't on the phone, she said. The phone was just the trigger. The sequence is in the blood, it's in the DNA. I don't understand, I cried, tears mixing with the rain on my face. Why me? Why did you pick me at the laundromat? I didn't pick you at the laundromat, Magda said. She coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook her small frame. I picked you the day you were born. I've been watching you your entire life, waiting for the moment when I would become too weak to carry it. Carry what? I screamed. Tell me. Magda looked up at the sky where the heavy clouds were blocking out the stars. The grid, she said. The global power grid. You think it runs on coal and nuclear fission and wind? That's the fuel, Tamsin. But the control? The architecture that keeps the lights on from Tokyo to New York without the whole system collapsing into chaos. That requires a processor more complex than any silicon chip ever built. She looked back at me, her eyes sad. It requires a human mind, specifically a mind from our bloodline. We are the stabilizers. We are the living fail-safes. The code runs through us. It regulates the flow. Without us, the surges would tear the modern world apart in a week. My head was spinning. You're saying I'm a battery? No, she said sharply. You are the regulator, and I am expiring. She gripped the shotgun tighter, her knuckles white. The architects, the people hunting you, they don't want to fix the grid. They want to control it. They want to weaponize the blackout. They need the sequence to do that, and the sequence can only exist in a living host compatible with the source code. She pointed a shaking finger at me. That is why you are being hunted, not for what you know, but for who you are. You are the only other person alive who shares my genetic markers. You are my niece, Tamsin. The daughter of the sister I couldn't save. The world tilted on its axis. My parents had died in a car crash when I was 3. I had been raised in foster care. I had no family. I had no history. You're lying, I whispered. Look at your arm, she commanded. Look at mine. Biology doesn't lie. I looked down at the violet light pulsing under my skin. It was brighter now, illuminating the mud around me. I could feel it sinking with something massive, something distant. I could feel the hum of the power lines miles away. I could feel the electricity in the air. I'm dying, Tamsin, Magda said, her voice growing weaker. The transfer is almost complete. My light is going into you. You have to finish what I started. You have to keep the sequence out of their hands. She raised the shotgun, but she wasn't pointing it at me. She was pointing it at the tree line behind me. They're here, she said calmly. I spun around, scrambling to my knees. Through the blur of the rain and my own distorted vision, I saw them. Shadows detaching themselves from the darkness of the forest. The red dots of laser sights danced across the wet grass, converging on the cabin. Get inside, Magda ordered, racking the slide of the shotgun. There is a trap door under the rug. Go. I can't leave you, I said, panic rising in my throat. I'm already dead, she said, a small, grim smile touching her lips. This is just the paperwork. A gunshot cracked through the night, splintering the wood of the porch railing inches from her head. Magda didn't flinch. She raised her weapon and fired back, a deafening boom that shook the ground. Geo, she screamed. I scrambled up the stairs, throwing myself through the door of the cabin just as the air filled with the hornet buzz of suppressed gunfire. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was Tamsin Vane. I was a weapon. I was a key. And I was the only thing standing between the world and total darkness. I slammed the door and locked it, the violet light from my arm illuminating the room like a flare. I'm Tamsin Vane, 29 years old, and I used to think my biggest burden was a missed deadline, not the electromagnetic weight of the entire world pulsing through my veins. I slammed the heavy timber door shut and threw the iron bolt, my chest heaving like a bellows. The sound of gunfire outside was a rhythmic, popping thunder that vibrated in my teeth. I fell back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the rough floorboards, clutching the arm that didn't look like mine anymore. The violet light bleeding through my jacket sleeve was bright enough to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the dark cabin. "Get up," Magda rasped. I looked up. The old woman had dragged herself in through a side entrance I hadn't seen, trailing a streak of dark blood across the floor. She wasn't holding the shotgun anymore. She was clutching her side, her face an ashen mask of pain, but her eyes, my eyes, were burning with a terrifying resolve. "They're breaching the perimeter," she wheezed, stumbling toward a massive metallic console built into the far wall of the log cabin. It looked wrong, an alien piece of industrial machinery grafted into the rustic wood, covered in switches and a single smooth glass plate. "We don't have time for the trapdoor. We have to initiate the purge." I scrambled to my feet, the pain in my arm flaring into a white-hot agony that made my vision tunnel. "You said you were dying," I shouted, grabbing her shoulder to steady her. "You said you were my aunt." Magda turned to me, and in the harsh violet glow of my own skin, I saw the lie crumble. She reached up and touched my cheek with a trembling, withered hand. "I lied," she whispered, a tear cutting a track through the grime on her wrinkled face. "I'm not your Aunt Tamsin, I'm your sister." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "That's impossible. You're 70 years old." "I'm 29, she said, her voice breaking. "We're twins, the architects took me first. The grid doesn't just run on electricity, Tamsin, it feeds on time, it metabolizes life force to regulate the flow. I've burned through 50 years in 3, that's why I found you, it's why I gave it back." A roar outside cut her off, the guttural, mechanical growl of high-performance engines. "They're here," she screamed, shoving me toward the console. I stumbled toward the machine, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the window, I saw the headlights slicing through the trees, blinding white beams that swept across the cabin walls like searchlights in a prison yard. Black SUVs were tearing up the mud of the driveway, boxing us in. "What is this?" I yelled, staring at the glass plate. "The fail-safe," Magda cried, leaning against the console, her breathing shallow and wet. "The architects want to control the flow. This kills it. It sends a feedback loop through the biosignature. It fries the grid, all of it. The satellites, the power stations, the data centers. It sends the world back to the dark ages." The heavy thud of boots hitting the porch echoed through the cabin. A voice amplified by a bullhorn boomed from outside. "Open the door, we have the perimeter secured. There is nowhere to run." I looked at the glowing lattice on my arm, then at the glass plate. The violet light was pulsing in sync with the hum of the machine. "If I do this," I stammered, "what happens to the people, the hospitals, the planes?" "They have backups," Magda said, gripping my good arm with surprising strength. "But the architects, their control vanishes. Their surveillance, their weapons, their leverage, it all goes dark. It's the only way we get out of here alive. In the chaos, we vanish." The door handle rattled violently. Then came the smash of a battering ram, splintering the wood. "Tamsin," Magda screamed. "Choose, be a prisoner or be a ghost." I looked at the tactical team swarming past the window, their weapons drawn, moving with the precision of a death squad. I looked at my sister, a woman whose life had been stolen to keep the lights on for a world that didn't know she existed. The rage flared in my chest, hotter than the violet fire in my veins. They wanted a battery. They wanted a slave. Let it burn, I whispered. I slammed my glowing palm onto the glass plate. The reaction was instantaneous. A shockwave of pure energy slammed into me, arcing from my shoulder down to my fingertips. It felt like sticking my hand into a lightning bolt. I screamed, my back arching as the violet light surged out of my skin and into the machine. The console whined, a high-pitched shriek that shattered the glass of the windows. Outside, the headlights of the SUVs exploded in unison. Then the silence hit. It wasn't just the quiet of the woods. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of absolute darkness. The hum of the machine died. The distant, ambient buzz of electricity that I hadn't even realized I could hear, the 60-cycle hum of the modern world, vanished. Run, Magda breathed, grabbing my hand. We didn't go out the front. We scrambled through the back of the cabin, kicking open the rotted timber of the rear wall that Magda had weakened. We spilled out into the cold, wet grass of the forest edge. Behind us, I heard the shouts of the tactical team, stripped of their comms, their night vision, and their coordination. They were yelling in confusion, their flashlights dead, their technological superiority reduced to nothing but heavy metal in the dark. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't look back at the life I had before this morning. I gripped my sister's withered hand, and together we sprinted into the tree line, swallowed by the shadows of a world that had suddenly, violently gone off the grid. My arm was still glowing, but faintly now like a dying ember. I covered it with my sleeve. I was no longer a journalist. I was a fugitive in a world without eyes, and for the first time in my life I was wide awake.